My name is Whitaker, Director of Compliance Architecture at Halberd Systems. I was hired to stop small leaks before they became floods. Over 7 years, I built a control stack from the ground up, a vendor onboarding protocol with 4 eyes on every file, a risk model that matched wire patterns against historical incidents, and a policy manual that auditors began to quote back to other clients. False positives dropped by half. 3 consent decrees were lifted a year early. Finance said I made bureaucracy humane. Operations said I made speed safe. I took more pride in the quiet things. Clean logs, clean ledgers, and the faint click of a gate closing when a loophole tried to slip past. My work began in the weeds. Invoice metadata, duplicate tax numbers, freight lanes that did not match declared routes, and ended in patterns. I liked the rhythm of it. A vendor registry that never lied because it could not. Notes that were written as if a stranger would one day need to trust them. I interviewed warehouse foremen and junior buyers as often as I briefed the board. People tell you where the risks live if you let silence do half the talking. My tools were plain: curiosity, a few lines of structured query language, and a habit of reading contracts aloud until the words gave up their tricks. The year trouble found me started with praise and an odd request. The chief financial officer asked for pragmatic exceptions on 3 strategic suppliers. The names were new. Their files were thin. Legal wanted to move them through the fast lane too, catch quarter. I asked for bank letters. I asked for beneficial ownership. I asked for the things that keep a company honest when nobody is watching. Smiles got tight. The chief of staff stopped copying me on threads. I noticed purchase orders jumping numbers and a rush of change orders issued on Fridays at 6:58 p.m. Nothing blatant. Just the soft pressure that tells you to look away. Then the hotline pinged. An anonymous tip about gray deals in my department. Compliance scheduled a walkthrough. I brewed coffee and printed the policies I had written, line numbered, with revision histories and signatures. I laid out the vendor registry like a map you could read in daylight. I was not worried. The point of writing a system is that it can defend itself. Still, as the elevator doors opened and the site lead stepped out with 2 investigators I had trained 3 years earlier, I felt a cold seam open between what I knew to be true and what someone needed to be true. I straightened the badge on my belt, set out pens in a neat row, and welcomed them in. They began with my favorite question and turned it into a blade. "Walk us through exceptions," Lena Ortega said. Eyes on the checklist, voice careful. I opened the control book and traced the path I had written: request, rationale, compensating control, 2 approvals, 30-day sunset. I showed them the query that flagged Friday change orders and the report that grouped vendors by beneficial owner. We pulled the 3 new suppliers the CFO wanted fast-tracked. Their files were tidy in the way cheap jewelry is tidy. Seabright Procurement, LLC had a bank letter with the right watermark, yet the routing number mapped to a branch 2 states away. Orthris Logistics, LLC used a warehouse address that doubled as a 7-company mail drop. Cobalt Glen Advisors, LLC claimed advisory services on a rate card that matched a template I had seen in a different case 5 years earlier. The author metadata on their statements of work named a user called Pruhul. Patrick Rule was the chief of staff. I asked to extend the sample. We pulled 10 more transactions. The same pattern repeated. Beneficial ownership disclosures cited a nominee trust, Halcyon nominee, administered by a boutique firm that also did filings for the CEO's charitable foundation. The registry's crosswalk showed shared registered agents. 2 invoices posted at 6:58 p.m. on consecutive Fridays rounded quarter-end revenue. A 3rd billed, risk remediation services, back to us through a marketing budget line I did not control. When I called accounts payable to confirm remit details, the analyst went quiet and asked if legal was looped. I answered with the policy number for mandatory escalation and watched the room change temperature. At noon, I was asked upstairs. The windows on 30 looked west over the river. The room had that prepared air that says the decision was made before anyone walked in. The CFO, Mara Ellison, didn't sit. "We received a serious allegation," she said. "An anonymous report claims your team has been blocking strategic partnerships and steering work toward preferred vendors." She slid a sheet across the table like a receipt. It quoted my emails. Only the timestamps were shifted and the thread headers cut. Patrick smiled without moving his mouth. "We need your laptop for forensic imaging," he said, "and your phone for a security sweep." HR was there with a folder. "Laura Chen, Kind eyes, small voice. This is administrative leave pending investigation. Effective immediately. We appreciate your cooperation. I felt the first wave of heat and let it pass through me. I counted breaths. I asked for a chain of custody form and the name of the custodian. I asked that my personal notebook be excluded under Policy 6.4 as non-corporate property. I asked that IT place a litigation hold on my mailbox, my drive, and the vendor registry. I cited the retention schedule. It is a strange relief to use the rules for what they were made for. The General Counsel's deputy, called in by speakerphone, confirmed the hold and told me not to access systems until cleared. I nodded. I did not argue. I signed the form that said I had surrendered the laptop in good condition and initialed the inventory line for the charger that would never be returned. Back at my desk, I wrote a single page in my pocket notebook. Names, dates, transaction IDs, routing prefixes, the word halcyon on its own line. I wrote the policy citations I had given out loud, so I would not later wonder if I had imagined them. I did not print a thing. I did not email a thing. I asked myself what was mine to carry, without breaking trust. The policy manual was public. My memory belonged to me. Secretary of State filings could be pulled by any citizen with a browser. I sketched the map I would need to redraw from the open record if I had to. I watched my chat client sign me out and my calendar vanish. Security waited by the elevators with the soft stance of people who hope this goes well for everyone. On the way out, I passed to the boardroom. The CEO, Elias Brand, stood at the glass with his back to the floor, phone pressed to his chin. He did not look at me. The anonymous tip had done its job. It had fired the starter's pistol and aimed the smoke toward my door. In the lobby, Laura handed me a letter that said we were moving in different directions. The phrasing was elegant. It sounded like weather. It also gave me 30 minutes in a small conference room to collect myself, call a ride, and hand over the last thing that said I belonged. I laid my badge on the table and watched the light from the sensor go dark. The humiliation bit deep, but under it, something steadier clicked into place. Patterns do not care about opinion. Paper trails do not blush. If I had been selected as the obstruction, it meant someone feared the mechanism I had built. And if the mechanism was clean, it would still be there in the morning, ready to be read by anyone who knew how. I stepped into a wind that smelled like metal and rain. The city moved on, untroubled. My phone, now a slab without access, reflected my face back at me like a witness. I went home, sat at the kitchen table where I had once edited the policy manual line by line, and wrote a timeline in neat block letters. At the top I printed the word respect, in ink that would not bleed, then underlined it once. I did not know yet how wide the injustice ran. I only knew it was not an accident, and that the map I needed had already been drawn in my own hand with numbers no one could quietly erase. The first morning home I treated like quarter close. I cleared the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and drew a ledger in 2 columns, facts I could swear to, and leads I could lawfully rebuild from the open record. I wrote the policy numbers on the inside cover so I would not drift. I called a lawyer who does 2 things well: Sarbanes-Oxley whistleblower work and SEC submissions, and asked for an intake the same day. I wanted shelter before I took a step. I scanned my notes and had them notarized, then mailed a sealed copy to myself for a quiet postmark. Chain of custody is a habit. It slows the temptation to cut corners. When your name is the target, process becomes the spine you lean on. Scope came into view faster than I liked. I started with the routing numbers I had written from memory. The ABA directory put Seabright's bank 3 states away from the vendor's declared operations. Orthris's warehouse resolved to a virtual office that rents by the hour. Cobalt Glen's rate card lifted formatting from an old public RFP. I remembered because of the line spacing. The person who copied it left the wrong left margin. I pulled Secretary of State filings for all 3 vendors. The registered agent repeated. The manager names did not appear. A nominee trust did. Halcyon nominee. I searched the foundation the CEO chaired. The grant-making entity filed Form 990 PFs that listed the same law firm as counsel and registered agent on several small LLCs named after rivers. The pattern was neat in the way schemes are neat when they think neatness is a disguise. I drew a box around Halcyon and wrote, "Beneficial owner concealed." Then, under it, ASC 850 related party risk, Reg SK 404 exposure. I built a matrix the way I teach new analysts to do it. Rows were vendor names. Columns were EIN, registered agent, legal counsel, bank, suite number, and whether the address showed up on property tax rolls. Asterisks marked Friday postings at 6:58 p.m. weighted scoring flagged proximity to the corner office. Shared counsel, shared agent, shared suite, same courier signatures. A 3-star cluster formed around the CEO's world, the foundation, a private holding company he used for real estate, and the nominee trust. The delta between invoice rates and market comps averaged 19%. On 1, risk remediation engagement, Cobalt billed us to evaluate controls my team had already implemented, then pass those costs back through a marketing budget line. Circular billing is a fingerprint. You do not forget it once you learn the feel. Emotion kept trying to sprint. Strategy kept it walking. My lawyer, Dana Muir, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Was the company public? Yes, Halberd had been listed since 2009. Did I understand that my safest path was through the audit committee, the external auditor, and the SEC's whistleblower portal, in that order? I did. We drafted a protected disclosure that did 3 things no enemy likes. It was short. It cited rule and law. It attached exhibits that any auditor could replicate from the public record in an afternoon. We referenced Section 13B, 2B of the Exchange Act on Internal Accounting Controls, Section 302 certifications signed by the CEO and CFO, ASC 850 on related parties, and Item 404 of Regulation SK on disclosures of transactions with management's interests. We did not accuse, we described. We named the control failures and the pressure points. We quantified the overbilling and the quarter-end smoothing risk in real numbers. $14.8 million in 9 months across 3 entities, plus unbooked liabilities where make goods would be owed if any of the services proved misrepresented. I wrote to the audit committee chair through the channel required by policy, direct email to the independent director's address listed in the proxy. The subject line was dull on purpose. Policy 3.2.1, Escalation per Section 5C. In the body I said I was invoking protected activity under SOX 806 and Dodd-Frank. I attached the memo as Exhibit A, the vendor matrix as Exhibit B, and a timeline as Exhibit C. I included a list of preservation requests for ledgers, bank reconciliations, change orders, and executive calendar entries for the Fridays in question. I asked that outside counsel be retained to run the review and that the external auditor be notified. I did not copy management. I printed nothing. I saved everything to a thumb drive that went into a safe deposit box with the receipt tucked under my lawyer's card. Parallel tracks make a plan stronger. I opened the SEC portal and answered each question as if a stranger would need to follow my path blind. I described the vendors, the nominee trust, the overlap in agents and counsel, the timing, the delta to market, and the risk that certifications given to investors were made without full disclosure of related party transactions and control deficiencies. I listed names because names anchor air. Mara Ellison, CFO. Patrick Rule, Chief of Staff. Elias Brand, CEO. I did not speculate on intent. I wrote the word slush once in a quote box under tipster allegation and left it there, because drama is a decoy and math is enough. I made a list of people who still believed in the work more than in the room. Lena from compliance. Harish in internal audit. A senior manager at our external firm Dempsey & Baird who once taught me to index work papers so clearly a storm could not shake them out of order. I would not ask them to talk. I would ask them to read. If a special committee formed, they would be invited to test, not to cover. Truth has a way of recruiting quietly when you let it. I wrote their names in pencil and circled them to remind myself that no one must be pulled in before the guardrails were up. Then I set the terms for myself. No revenge. Only remedy. No leaks to the press while formal channels were live. No handling of company data beyond my memory and the open record. Answer every question under oath if asked. Do not guess. Do not adorn. Remember that policy exists to protect people when positions fail. I closed the notebook and felt something like alignment under the grief. They had taken my badge and tried to take my name. The work was still mine. The map was clear. The next step would be slow on purpose, and it would be visible to the people who had to see it. The audit committee moved first. At 7:42 a.m., the chair replied to my memo with a single sentence and an attachment. We have retained Barton Wicks LLP as independent counsel. Please make yourself available today. That line did two things. It took the matter out of management's hands. It put process in charge. At noon, I sat in a conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner. My lawyer at my left, two partners across from us, a court reporter between. They gave the upjohn warning. I confirmed I sought protected status, not privilege. We worked through my exhibits page by page. I narrated slowly. I did not wander. They asked for my path from memory to public record so they could replicate it without me. I told them. When we ended, a partner named Duval said the word thorough in a tone that had weight. The committee issued hold notices that afternoon to finance, procurement, the CEO's office, and IT. They instructed IT to image phones and laptops for the CFO, the chief of staff, and two executive assistants. Renshaw Forensics set up in a sealed room with anti-static mats and yellow tags. Okta logs were pulled for Fridays 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. over 9 months. SAPS/4 approvals were exported with user and device fingerprints. Coupa change orders were dumped with service account tokens and API keys. I had written the access certifications that kept those trails honest. It felt like watching a bridge I designed take the weight it was built for. Dempsey and Baird, our external auditor, convened an independence call and then created a shadow team to assist the committee without touching their opinion work. Saira Duong, a senior manager who once taught me to index work papers, asked for my matrix and redid it from scratch with her staff. They came back with the same clusters. They found two more entities I had missed, both using the Halcyon Nominee Trust. They tested invoice rates against peer benchmarks and put the 19% delta into a neat table that an investor could read. They highlighted quarter-end postings in yellow and tied them to deferred revenue adjustments elsewhere in the ledger. Numbers are calm. They make conversation honest. Vendors were contacted through counsel. One responded with a letter lacking punctuation and threatened to sue for defamation. Another went silent. Seabright, the most careful, sent a one-page KYC package that used a bank logo in the wrong shade of blue. Renshaw called the bank's verification line and recorded the answer with counsel on the line. The letter was a forgery. Outside counsel obtained consent to request records from the registered agent. The agent delivered an affidavit. It said the beneficial owner of Halcyon Nominee held the interest. For the benefit of Brand Family Holdings, LLC, the word benefit landed like a pin in a map. Interviews began with people who could anchor facts. Accounts payable confirmed that approval thresholds were edited twice in the last year and delegated to the CFO's assistant during Friday evening windows. IT confirmed that a service account called Coupa SVC executed batch change orders from a device last registered to Patrick Rule's laptop. Procurement analysts described a standing instruction to accelerate strategic suppliers pushed by the chief of staff with the CFO copied. Legal said they warned against the nominee structure for anything touching operating spend. The warning never reached the board. It stopped in the corner office. Management tried to contain. A statement went out that an anonymous tip had accused a former employee of obstruction and that the company had placed that person on leave. Barton Wicks replied within the hour and asked that all communications on the matter be cleared by them. The statement was withdrawn. I received a message through a back channel. A consulting role could be arranged. A general release would protect me. Compensation would be generous. I read it twice, printed nothing, and wrote one sentence back through counsel. I seek remediation, not accommodation. My conditions were specific. Full disclosure to the board. Restitution of ill-gotten fees. Reassignment of approvals to the process we had designed. Protection for line staff who complied under pressure. A retraction of any implication that the mechanism had failed. The committee scheduled a special session. I was invited for an opening statement. I wore the same suit I wore the day we lifted our second consent decree. I looked at people I had trained, many now sitting as decision-makers, and laid out the map again with fewer words than the first time. Exhibit A showed the entities and agents. Exhibit B aligned the Friday postings to approval edits. Exhibit C quantified the delta. Exhibit D showed the forged bank letter. I ended with the simplest point. The system worked as far as it was allowed to. Where it was bypassed, it kept a record. That record belongs to you. We waited in a quiet hallway while the board deliberated. My lawyer folded and unfolded a corner of the agenda. I counted the breaths it took a second hand to cross each minute mark. When the door opened, the committee chair's face had the look of someone who had decided to lift weight rather than shift it. Immediate actions followed. The CFO was placed on leave. The Chief of Staff's access was suspended pending review. A special committee was formally chartered with full authority to engage independent counsel, forensic firms, and any other advisors. Trading was not halted, but the company prepared an 8K. The CEO was asked to make himself available the next morning for a recorded interview. That night I walked home the long way. The river was slate under a thin moon. I felt anger loosen not because it was finished, but because the work had found its lane. The plan was no longer mine. It belonged to governance, where it should have been all along. I slept for the first time in a week with my phone face down and the notebook closed. The next day would not be clean. Clean was not the goal. Truth was, and truth was moving. The recorded interview with the chief executive began at 8:03 a.m. Barton Wicks set the tone. Upjohn warning. Exhibit stickers ready. The chair asked simple questions that forced tight answers. Who approved the Friday threshold edits? Why were approvals delegated to a non-finance assistant? What is halcyon nominee? Why do the registered agents' affidavits name Brand Family Holdings as beneficiary? Elias tried to widen the frame. He spoke about speed, innovation, trusted advisors. Counsel brought him back to the page. He denied knowledge of specific vendors. Renshaw projected an Okta log showing Coupa SVC executing a batch from Patrick's device, while Elias's credentials approved emergency delegation 4 minutes earlier. The silence that followed felt like a tide going out. He asked for a break. The court reporter marked the time, and we waited for the door to close. When they returned, the room held one more fact. Dempsey and Baird had tied a transfer from Seabright's account to a charitable pledge made by the foundation the same week. The bank officer who verified the forged letter had sent a declaration. The pattern was not a mistake, it was a circuit. Company cash left through a related entity at above-market rates, then reappeared under a philanthropic banner that polished the brand upstairs. The partner from Barton Wicks produced a short list of statutes and policies and set it on the table like a metronome. Exchange Act books and records. Internal control requirements. Disclosure duties for related party transactions. The clawback policy the board had adopted last year. No drama, only gravity. At noon, the committee called an executive session. By 2, the board convened a special meeting. I sat outside with a paper cup of water, and my lawyers calm beside me. Floors away, people did their jobs. Accounts payable flagged the 3 entities for immediate offboarding. Procurement closed the fast lane and restored 4 eyes on every change order. IT disabled the service account for Coupa Automation until it could be rekeyed under segregation of duties. Legal drafted letters to the vendors demanding complete beneficial ownership disclosures and escrow of disputed fees. Dempsey and Baird prepared a draft conclusion on a material weakness in internal control over financial reporting and the potential need to amend the last 2 quarterly reports. At 4:11 p.m., an assistant handed me a copy of Form 8K that would post within the hour. Item 5.02 recorded the resignation of the Chief Financial Officer and the termination of the Chief of Staff. Item 4.02 disclosed that prior financial statements should not be relied upon to the extent they reflected transactions with Seabright, Orthrus, Cobalt Glen, or any entity administered by Halcyon nominee, pending review. Item 8.01 noted the formation of a special committee and the retention of independent counsel and forensic advisors. The last paragraph named me without adjectives. The allegations of obstruction against former employee Aaron Whitaker are withdrawn. Mr. Whitaker has assisted the special committee. I read the sentence twice, then once more for the part of me that had been waiting to breathe. The board met with Elias at dusk. They asked for his devices. He refused. The charter they had adopted allowed for immediate action to protect the company. He was placed on administrative leave. The chair read a short statement that did not gloat. "We will honor the work. We will honor the truth. We will fix what we allowed." Council served a preservation notice on Brand Family Holdings and the foundation. The committee authorized a referral to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to the United States Attorney for the district. The words were precise. They did not name crimes. They named custodians and dates. I went home in the wind and checked my mail. On the table sat a courier envelope from Barton Wicks. Inside was a letter from the committee. It apologized for the treatment I had received and invited me to serve as an external advisor to the remediation program. The scope was listed in clean bullet points. Rewrite and reissue the related party policy with board approval and public posting. Rebuild the approval hierarchy in SAP and Coupa with hard stops at quarter end. Implement continuous monitoring on vendor changes with independent alerts to internal audit. Train the board on their duty to ask and to insist. Establish a direct line from the hotline to the committee without management screening. Calculate restitution and clawback compensation aligned to the policy. It was the program I would have written if no one were watching. Now everyone would be. News reached people before headlines did. My phone blinked with messages that were really exhalations. An AP clerk who had frozen at my call weeks earlier. A buyer who had felt the pressure of the word strategic sink into her calendar on Friday nights. Internal audit sent a note with only 3 words. "Your map held." I wrote back 4. "It belonged to you." The next morning, the market opened lower, but not in free fall. Fear gives way to clarity when the plan is public. Employees packed a town hall where the chair answered questions with sentences that had subjects and verbs. Renshaw presented the control failures in a slide that fit on 1 page. Dempsey and Baird explained what a material weakness meant and what a restatement would and would not do. I spoke last. I did not offer catharsis. I offered a list. The people who said no and were overruled. The places the system signaled and was bypassed. The changes that would make it hard to hide again. I finished with the only promise I can make without lying. We will not be perfect. We will be legible. Legible systems are harder to steal from. A week later, Council delivered a final letter of separation that replaced the bad paper HR had handed me on the way out. The company cleared my name in writing, made whole the wages withheld, and added an acknowledgement in the proxy that the policy architecture I wrote had allowed the special committee to see. The board adopted a resolution to publish a summary of the related party review and the remediation plan. The vendors faded. The foundation severed ties with a law firm that had treated neatness as a disguise. The CEO stayed on leave while the world narrowed around facts. I walked back into the building as a contractor, with no badge at my belt and the work in my hands, steady, visible enough. Months turned into a clean ledger. The company filed its restatement and named the weakness for what it was. Fees were disgorged, bonuses clawed back under the policy the board had once adopted for appearance, and now honored for substance. Related party disclosures in the new 10K were plain enough that a first-year analyst could trace them. The foundation published an independent review and rebuilt its board. The fast lane died without ceremony. 4 eyes returned to every change order. Segregation of duties was written into the system, not parked in a handbook no one opened after orientation. Continuous monitoring sent its alerts to internal audit over a line no one could mute. The map held, not because I held it, but because it was legible to many. When the CEO finally resigned, the statement was brief. It named stewardship and thanked employees. It did not offer a story. The numbers had already told it. My life shrank and became sturdier. I kept the advisory role and refused a title that would ask me to belong to the room that forgot what work is for. I taught the board how to read an approval log the way one reads a bank statement for a parent. I taught young analysts to write memos so clear an enemy would be forced to argue with the facts, not with them. I learned to ask for help when the wind rose. I learned that process does not love you back. It serves the person who leans on it and the person who will come after. I kept the notebook and retired the word slush. I preferred the words books, records, control, remedy. My anger did not vanish. It changed into a kind of care that checks locks twice without announcing it. If there is a moral, it is quiet. Respect the person who tends the gate you do not notice. Their craft is your margin. Do not build a system that depends on trust where a record will do. Do not let a clever structure hide a simple truth about who pays and who benefits. Competence is not loud. Integrity is not a speech. Justice, when it comes, arrives with inventory numbers, chain of custody forms, and signatures that look ordinary until you need them. I was targeted because I wrote the rules that made theft inconvenient. I prevailed because I followed those same rules when they were used against me. The badge on the table that night was never the point. Belonging is not plastic on a lanyard. It is the work you leave behind that others can use without asking your name. This is dignity in practice. To be legible, to make harm difficult, to give your map to the next hands and trust that the system will hold when someone decides to test it.